Today, super excited for this conversation. It's been a minute since we've done one of these audio sessions. Honestly, I think I got too wrapped up in trying to say the perfect thing all the time. Like even the concept of the podcast is just kind of off the cuff. So that's what we're doing today. It's not fully off the cuff. Trust me, I have talking points. Actually, let's just jump right into it and I'll give some context into what this is. For those who don't know who I am, my name is Maceo. I use she, her pronouns, and I go by the ERG Homegirl here on LinkedIn. I'm literally all things ERGs. I think about it all the time just because there's so much work that needs to be done in the ERG space. Specifically with today's conversation, this came out of a conversation that I had with someone last week. And honestly, I have this conversation maybe like once a week with somebody. Different people at different companies, they all say the same thing. Specifically that there's a lot of pressure to have business impact for their ERGs. Pressure, who from? I mean, I guess it varies, but we'll dive into that a little bit. But really, when I had this conversation last week, the thing about it was, I figured it was time that I just speak broadly about this versus just like having these individual conversations. Because I think it's one of those things that we need in the space as part of this ERG movement, changing and rethinking employee resource groups. We have to align on this whole business impact part of the conversation. How we do these typically, so this is it's a recorded conversation. I'll just go through my spiel. Afterward, we can have a conversation. We can do Q&A. However you all want to do it. I'm here till noon. So that's basically how it goes. A little bit of context. I always like to start off the podcast with this. The 3 principles of the ERG movement is super important because this always comes up. Principle number 1, an ERG program must operate like a business enterprise. So that really speaks to one, like the programmatic piece of it. Each ERG shouldn't be operating on its own. There should be a programmatic approach, and it actually, you can use the same principles that are found in business development guidelines and apply them to employee resource groups. And that's basically what I teach. Principle number 2, every single ERG program must benefit both the employees that make up the program, but also the business that it operates within. We'll be touching on that today because I feel like there's some confusion in what that means. And then principle number 3 is literally escaping my brain right now. Principle number 3 is, it'll come back to me. It's still morning it's morning. So it takes a little second. But anyway, plus, like I said, it's been a minute since I've done this live. So it'll come to me eventually. But back to this conversation on business impact. Again, I hear this conversation a lot. And I think really where it comes from is probably back maybe 3 or 4 years ago when the term business resource group really started popping up a little bit more. It started showing up a lot more in official development models of ERGs. And the concept with a BRG was that it's going to be more structure to an existing ERG, and it's going to have business impact, where an employee resource group, it's just for the employees. It's like a less formal, less important version of a BRG. And the concept is that one day ERGs would then evolve into BRGs, and that's the concept with their existence. I have never subscribed to that. It never really made sense to me. One thing that I like to say about principle number 2 of the ERG movement is that I intentionally have it structured so that the employee part comes first and then the business. If you heard me speak before, you've heard me say you need a community of people that are bought in, a strong community, before you go and try to make business impact, because then who are you trying to make business impact with? Essentially, it's probably going to fall all on the ERG leaders. So anyway, all that to say, most of the time, even when I do see BRGs, they lose the community feel. There's no community. It's just like, how are we doing this thing for the company? And even then, it doesn't really make sense to come to an ERG and say, okay, well, now we're going to be focused on business stuff. You've had your fun. Now we have to meet our 4C quota for the commerce pillar. Now we got to do more business stuff. It doesn't work like that. Real ERG development, and if you haven't checked out the ERG movement model, I recommend that you do. But real ERG development is a gradual scaling of a community, scaling it from doing initiatives that benefit employees to then also being able to include initiatives that benefit the business. So it starts with how are you actually proving that you're benefiting employees? Then it can go to how are you proving that you're benefiting the business, depending on where your company's take on that is. I know that right now it might seem like this is all jumbled. Don't worry. We're about to get into the 7. Actually, originally I had 7. I actually just kind of condensed them into 5. 5 reasons why this business impact conversation needs to change. And I guess we can just kind of jump into it from there. So, exciting things. Thing number 1, basically, like after I talked to this person, I gave them this answer, but it was definitely jumbled then. And then after that, I just kind of went on a rant, like in my car, and I was just trying to figure out what am I trying to say. So basically, this is coming from that rant. And here we are nowadays. Okay, so going to it. When ERGs first started, they were really centered around building belonging for underrepresented groups. Actually, for those of you all who don't know where ERGs first started, the first ERG was at Xerox. It started back coming out of the civil rights movement. It was a Black ERG. Obviously, Black employees at the company, they just felt like they needed a place. That's where ERGs first started. I don't know how we've gotten so far from that original purpose today, where now they're like some people believe that ERGs serve the purpose of the business direct, like that's the real root of it, when it's not. ERGs are a people-focused initiative. So what really irritates me about this conversation is the concept that a lot of the companies that are trying to shift into being more, having a strong ROI for their ERGs, there's people who exist in their companies who are part of these underrepresented groups who literally hate their job. They hate the company that they're at because they don't feel that sense of belonging, because they're experiencing microaggressions, because they don't have a safe space. Like the fact that there's employees that exist at your company who are part of these groups that the ERGs are originally built for, that aren't being served, but we're going to ignore that part and we're going to focus on the business return on investment piece. That's like insane to me. Really, like I said, ERGs, they're about community, and that's how you build belonging. That's how you really make it a place where people feel like, oh, this is a space for me, is by having a strong community. That's why even in the ERG movement model, it's focused on community first. Like, how do we make a strong community? Like I said earlier, I say this all the time, community has to be the priority. So the concept of jumping to business impact, I mean, really, you might ask, like, what would even make someone say, like, okay, well, let's ignore those people. People who might feel like, okay, well, I'm a veteran, so maybe people will stereotype me to say, like, I'm crazy or something, or I'm a Black woman at the company, so, you know, I get a whole bunch of microaggressions, I'm being passed over for promotions, I'm an LGBTQ employee, and they're mispronouncing me all the time. Like, there's employees right now who are experiencing that, and they don't even feel like your ERG is a safe space. Okay. Now, the question, like I said, what would even make someone say, skip over all those people, let's focus on the return on investment piece? 3 reasons that I could possibly see. I think confusion might be one. And for the record, if you have never heard me speak before, I speak very directly, I'm in my authentic energy right now. So, yeah, this is kind of how it's go. But I'm not saying this to attack you. If you are one of these people who have like a focus on return on investment, if you have a BRG versus an ERG, this is just the real kind of conversation that we need to have in this space. So that's why I'm having it, and that's why I'm speaking so, I don't know, directly, aggressively. I don't know how you categorize it, but yes. Anyway, I will say think 1 is confusion, because I feel like, to be fair, like this is what we're saying, this is what we think the executives want to see, and this is what we think that the business wants to see. And we also see different companies and they talk about, you know, how ERGs have ROI, even though most of these companies very rarely have information to back that claim up, but we see it a lot. So that being said, I feel like there might just be some general confusion saying, well, I think that this is what is supposed to happen. Or even with the 4C model, because one of the pillars is commerce, it's like, well, this is a pillar, so I guess this has to be incorporated in our program. Fun fact, I'm not a fan of the 4C model, but that's not a conversation for right now. But one of the reasons why I'm not a fan is because it does add to that confusion of what is this ERG supposed to be doing. Reason number 2, maybe you're at an org that truly is like money first completely. Now, I am not the person who's like putting feelings first all the time and people first, but an organization that is people first in the sense that it cares about its employees more than it cares about the money, those are organizations that thrive. And that's a fact. That's a fact. Funny enough, I was just reading a book yesterday, and maybe that's also what kind of prompted me to do this as a live, where, and it's a book, it's called, why I don't know the name, I don't know. It's called The Infinite Mindset by Simon Sinek. And if you're a fan of his work, I mean, amazing work. And at least that's what I subscribe to when it comes to companies and how they should run, being employee first. That's really what he talks about a lot. But that being said, he was talking about how, for instance, at Apple, they treat their employees excellent, or even at Costco, they treat their employees excellent. They start, even when it comes to pay, like at a reasonable wage for minimum wage, they start at like $15 an hour. And that's back when he wrote the book. So it might even be higher now. And they give their hourly employees, for instance, the same benefits that they give their corporate employees. Like, just how they treat their employees actually shows up in their retention. There's actual numbers to tie that there. That's the concept of being a people first organization. And even then, you might think of Apple as like, they're one of the Fortune 10 companies. Like, so obviously they do care about the money piece of it, but they also care about their employees. All that to say, maybe you're at an org that's not like that. And not every organization, not every company truly puts its employees first. Now, personally, that's not my cup of tea, but if that's the company that you're at, where it's saying every single thing we do, like we're cutting benefits to the bone, we're just trying to get as much money as possible, and maybe with the recession, maybe that is honestly where your company is at, where they're not thinking about the people right now. Again, it's not my cup of tea, but it is where some companies are, so you got to understand where you're at. But even then, I wouldn't even say that that's the majority of companies. I would actually probably group that as like executive confusion, where same concept as the first one that I mentioned, where maybe you as leading the program are, saying like, I think that this is what it's supposed to be, but I don't really know. Maybe the executives are the same way. I think that this is what it's supposed to be, but because there's so much confusion in the ERG space, they don't really know either, so they're doubling down on the fact that it has to be a revenue producing space in the company. So I don't know, you can take that as it is as well. The last reason I'll say that maybe, and oftentimes this is the tone that I get when I have these conversations, and why people might overlook like the communities and the people within an organization that need a community just to do business impact. Honestly, I'm saying this with love, but it's actually a really selfish request. Oftentimes, because right now where everything is in the D&I space, people are afraid of layoffs, they're afraid of all these things. Do you want to be able to say, here's what I'm doing for the business? Like, you really just want to make it as obvious as possible. Like, oh, I'm leading this program that has a direct tie to revenue. And even then, oftentimes I see us falling into the trap of making up metrics to fit that narrative. We're not going to go into that right now, but that's actually a later talking point. But oftentimes, it's really like this commerce pillar of the 4C model is what makes me look good to executives. Again, most of the time this is a guess. It's not an actual fact of what the executives are looking for. And it's really an insecurity request to force your ERG leaders to have this return on investment. Because what does that even mean? Like, honestly, okay, we're going to go into that. I'm sorry, I can just go into rants. But I mean, we'll talk about the metrics piece too when it comes to this return on investment, because oftentimes, again, we'll bring up the commerce pillar of the 4C model. where there's a list of things of what that could mean. It could mean impacting product or marketing or sales in some way that have to do with ERGs. I'm curious for an ERG, again, I highly recommend if you haven't already, check out the ERG movement model. But for ERGs in general, especially newer ERGs that don't have structure, that don't have strong governance, that don't have systems in place, you want them to immediately start working with the marketing team or the product team, or to even worse, I've seen at many companies, they'll just let their ERG leaders come up with, what does commerce mean to you? Like, here's the commerce pillar, maybe here's a document about the commerce pillar of the 4C model. You figure out what this means to you, and you come to us with some ideas. That is like, one, it's setting up the ERG leaders for complete disappointment because they're going to come up with all these ideas. And then when it comes to working with the teams that are going to implement them, 9 times out of 10, those teams are not ready, not interested right now in doing those things. It's not even because they're anti doing them, but they already have priorities that are actually focused on the business. So the concept of why we're even allowing ERG leaders to think that they have this type of impact, only for then it to be a slowed down process that can go over the course of years with trying to get even one commerce type initiative pushed through, is really, it makes sense why ERG leaders are burning out and why they feel like they're not accomplishing anything, because you wouldn't accomplish anything at that rate. Again, who is an ERG leader to go to a business unit and say, this is what you need to do? Like, we demand it. That's not the type of relationship that you want to build, especially when, again, if you as an ERG program don't have systems, don't have data, and your ERG leaders don't know how to use data to make decisions and things like that, it's going to be even worse, because even then, if the business unit that they want to work with is interested in working with them, they're not going to have any numbers to back it up. They're probably not even going to have any that explain the benefits of it, all the things that a business unit needs to make this type of investment and decision into making this commerce piece come to life. So all that being said, what metrics are we even looking at when we're talking about business investment? This is reason number 2, I guess, wrong metrics. Reason number 1, in case you didn't catch it, which I understand why, because I have a tendency to ramble. Reason number 1 was it's focusing on the wrong thing. Really the concept of, you have people at your organization that don't feel a sense of belonging, so why are you focusing on business and ignoring those people? Reason number 2 would be the wrong metrics are being used, even when we're talking about business ROI. 9 times out of 10, we're talking about marketing and even when it comes to talent acquisition and things like that. Really, and this is a more recent thought I've been having, when we think about ERGs, we should really think about what metrics the learning and development team are being measured against, and what numbers the employee engagement team are being measured against. What's their ROI? Because I feel like this conversation cannot be nearly as prevalent in those spaces as it is with ERGs. We're to the point, like, ERGs are being questioned. ERGs are being, like, companies are getting rid of their ERG programs because they're saying, like, what's the ROI? But I feel like this conversation is not, it could be made a lot clearer if we just adopted the same metrics as the learning and development team's ROI or the employee engagement team's ROI. The concept is, you invest in your employees, they're going to stay longer, they're going to be happier, they're going to work harder. That's the concept with an employee resource group when it comes to investment. Originally, ERGs were not invested in, it was just a community space, and that was the investment, I guess, in essence, is that employees could spend time in this community space. But now that ERGs are actually being invested in financially, and we need a ROI, the concept, and this is where principle number 2 of the ERG movement model comes in, where yes, it benefits the business, but it benefits the business in that employees are being benefited, that they have this space. Again, just like with Apple, just like with Costco and those examples earlier, you treat your employees well, they're going to like your company more, they're going to work harder, they're going to stay longer. Those are facts. Those are facts. And I know with me, when I say facts, it's something that's been proven. I wish I had the data right now. I would literally pull it up right now. But you can even read that book, Infinite Mindset by Simon Sinek, and he goes into it. So that being said, all that being said, again, ERGs, they are a program where companies are investing in their underrepresented groups. So the concept is that's how you're showing appreciation. That's how you're investing in your employees. And that is essentially the ROI. Okay, I think we get that piece there. Okay. Reason number 3 that this conversation needs to change. We're trying to turn employee resource groups into a revenue generating part of the business. But everyone's looking at the ERGs already as a cost center. We're the only ones that are trying to flip the script and make this into a revenue driving piece of the business. And since when is it a thing to turn to turn a cost center into a revenue driving piece of the business? Like, even when you think about how businesses work, like, your CFO has already written this off as a cost center. It's something that is going to cost money. But the concept, why are we spending the money? Again, it goes into what we're investing into our employees, where most of our employee engagement efforts, they might not capture these specific niche groups that are underrepresented. So in the interim, we have ERGs that are really customized towards making them feel a sense of belonging. So the concept of us trying to say, oh, well, ERGs are going to drive business for the company. It's not where do we get this from that was going to happen? Again, I have a hunch that it was with this development of ERGs into BRGs and that conversation recently that has been happening. That's going to turn that conversation around. I just don't know when that became a thing. And also keep in mind, we're trying to do this with volunteers only. So with volunteers only, we're trying to turn this cost center into a revenue driving piece of the business. And most people who are leading an ERG program are D&I program managers. They're not ERG program managers. So keep in mind that you're doing this with only half of your time. And that might be generous, honestly. So the concept of doing that, I just don't know where that came from. So let's get that out of our heads that ERGs are a revenue driving part of the business, because they're not. And it's okay that they're a cost center. I don't know, maybe that's also where the insecurity comes in. Like, maybe we feel uncomfortable knowing that we're a cost to the business. And again, with so much happening right now, with layoffs happening and things like that, no one wants to be associated with an extra cost that doesn't bring a direct benefit to the company. But just know, talk to your CFO, understand what makes this a healthy cost center versus not a healthy cost center. That's way more important than saying, oh, how do we drive business? Because again, that's going to lead to disappointment, and you're probably not going to do that. Especially to have multiple ERGs doing that at the same time with multiple business units, when again, you don't even have basic systems in place to maintain ERG leader momentum for them to have data and metrics, and you're trying to make this into a revenue driving piece of the business that has all of those things. Yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me. People team in general is a cost center. Okay. Moving along. So that's reason number 3. Reason number 4, don't worry, we only have 5, so I'm almost done with my rant here. Reason number 4, this one is, okay, I kind of already touched on this one a little bit. This comes to the bluffing piece of this conversation with all the false promises that are being given when it comes to ERGs, and saying things like ERGs are guaranteed that the business is going to make more money. And when we say those type of things without numbers that back it up, that is very, very damaging to the company. Not to the company, but to the ERG program. When we say things like having an ERG program is directly going to impact your retention. I know we just talked about earlier, treating your employees better impacts retention. But when we say that's not necessarily directly tied to ERGs if your ERG program isn't set up correctly. So whenever we start saying these things and saying, yeah, by having an ERG program, we're going to do this, this, and that for the company without having the hard numbers to back it up, this is again when we start saying, ooh, well, let's start thinking about what these numbers are. And when we start thinking about numbers, we automatically start thinking about the big numbers that we think the business cares about, not necessarily what's realistic to the ERGs. That's the only reason, honestly, why I think unlike with the learning and development team and the employee engagement team, why ERGs are being roped up into this conversation of what's the ROI, otherwise they have to go, is because there's a lot of this going on in the D&I space overall. Like right now in the D&I space, there's a question of, is there a ROI for D&I at the company, and what is it? Is it an external, or is it like, is this D&I team internal? Is it focused on like employee belonging, or is it focused on external, where a lot of D&I pillars at companies, they include some sort of external component. They include something about marketing or product or commerce in general. Maybe you might even see the 4C model show up, or the 4W. I think that there's like a 4W model, which is the exact same thing in essence. But you might see those things show up within your D&I strategy. And therefore, because the D&I team is trying to figure out what are we? Are we focusing just on employees, or are we all things to all people? And therefore, they try to make ERGs all things to all people. That's really the only reason that ERGs are in this conversation in the first place. Not a big fan of that. But all that being said, I just say that all that to say, data integrity, is that the message of that? It could be data integrity. It could be, how are we positioning our ERGs to actually say like what the purpose of the ERGs is going to be initially. Let me rephrase that, because I know that can be confusing. In my head, it makes sense, but I'm going to say that one more time. We have to understand what our ERG program is. Is it, just like we said with the D&I conversation, is it a program that is focused on the belonging of our employees, which once again, I've already told you all, if you don't have a strong community, you're trying to do business impact, it doesn't work anyway. So it should, yes, be on the belonging of your employees. But as it scales, do we intend on it being something where we're all things to all people and we're integrated into all parts of the business in one way or another? And we are, in one way or another. We have to have that understanding there of what our ERG program is and our ERG program vision. That's really, that's what I was trying to say all along. If you're writing down notes, point number 4 is having a clear ERG vision for your program. Like, what do we want this program to be when it's fully fledged out? And having clarity on what metrics would exist at that point to prove, I don't even want to say prove, because again, that can bring in confusion on what the ERG program is all about. But what are the metrics that we're going to be able to have that shows executives like this is what it's doing for employees? That's what I'll say. Understand what your vision is for your program, and don't just make up numbers, or even worse, like we can't just say it has an impact on retention right now, like at present, if we don't have those numbers. If we're going to say that to executives, we need to have the numbers approved now. But if we're trying to say down the line, it's going to have this impact, again, painting the vision of we want to get to a place where our ERG program has this kind of impact, that's something completely different. All aligned with that for sure, because that is, again, you're setting a goal to get to. But the concept of how are we framing our ERG program now? What's our vision? Where are we trying to go with our ERG program? Having that initial conversation. Oftentimes at a lot of ERG programs, we feel like, oh, well, we've already had this conversation with our executives and we can't go back and double back. You can, I promise. It's very advantageous for you to do so, actually. Actually, I'm not going to get into that part of the conversation because that's another separate rant. But that's point number 4. Understand where you want your ERG program to be. Point number 5. Very important. We kind of touched on it a little bit before, but stating it directly. This is the part that you can write down. ERG leaders are not D&I professionals. They're not. And even then, they're not professionals in each and every aspect of the business that they want to impact. This really needs to be said. ERG leaders are professionals at what their job is, whatever their day job is. That's their professional thing. Being an ERG leader, that's an act of passion, and most of the time it's because I want to build a community for my community. I really want to help this community to be stronger at this organization. I want to build a place of belonging for others here. That's what ERG leaders are good at. They know their community and they know how to build that space, or at least they have the passion to, and hopefully you as the ERG program manager can give them guidance on how to build that space effectively. So when it comes to identifying and implementing business ideas, most of the time they don't have the qualifications to do that or the know-how. And you might say, well, as a D&I team, we'll assist them with that. But again, 9 times out of 10, even you as a D&I team, when it comes to influencing stakeholders to doing things that ERG leaders want, again, it builds a very rocky relationship because stakeholders aren't expecting for this request to come out of nowhere. And now you're trying to push for this thing to move forward. And if you're trying to do this for multiple groups at a time, that's exhausting. So painting the picture for ERG leaders that that's their goal, is that they're serving as like many D&I professionals within an organization, is very misleading. It's a dangerous path to walk down as well. Instead, and it's okay that ERG leaders may have an interest in D&I. That's different. But at present, them as an ERG leader, they're a professional at their job, and they're also a professional at building that sense of belonging. So that's why you should really focus more so on the community piece. I did a podcast earlier this year, and it was on the difference between D&I committees and ERGs. It wasn't an ERG Movement podcast. I was featured on someone's podcast, and we had this conversation. And again, I will state, if you're trying to have your ERG serve as a D&I committee, where now it's focused on strong, focused business impact and business return on investment, just know that that's completely different from an ERG, an employee resource group, where we're trying to provide resources to employees. Employee impact is first. So just know, if you're trying to do a D&I committee, that's something completely different. And honestly, I would recommend encouraging the different various business units to have maybe a form of a D&I committee. So for instance, you can have a marketing D&I committee that's really focused on how are we making sure that our marketing is inclusive. Or maybe that's what your team does as a diversity team. If that is what your team does, that's something different. But just know your ERG leaders, while they can still serve as a helper to those groups when those groups are ready and when those business units come to them. That does not mean that they get to tell the business units, hey, this is what you need to do, because ultimately the business units are going to be the professionals on here's where our business is at right now. Here's our core customer. Here's how we can incorporate these themes in a way that benefits our business. Okay. Those are my pieces. I will just say, if you want some takeaways from this, and if you're one of those companies that's hearing a lot, I'm getting a lot of pressure to have ROI for our ERG program. Thing one, question the motive and the root. Who is providing this pressure, and why are they providing this pressure? Is it actually coming from executives, or could it just be potentially the head of D&I who's still trying to get clarity on the program? Again, no shade in that, because that's just where the space is. That's what happens when you have a new booming industry, is that it has to figure itself out. But understand, and if that is the case, then you might have to have that recentering conversation on, let's first focus on strengthening our communities before we focus on, this whole business impact piece. Thing two, understand the goal of your ERG program. It's similar with the first one, but it's a little bit different. But again, is your ERG serving as a belonging program, or is it serving as a business impact program? Is it serving as an education program even? That also goes back to the conversation of belonging in the workplace and how we're seeing that trending more in the D&I space. But also, if your ERGs are trying to educate allies all the time, that's their main thing, that could also add to the confusion of your ERG program. And I don't know, that's a different conversation. But I felt like it was necessary to say, get clarity on what your program is. This way you can know what it is not. I actually just recently did a different podcast, and this one should be coming out soon. Someone really cool, I'm not going to spoil it, that I had come on the ERG Movement Podcast. And she said, protect your yes by saying no. I don't know. She said something like that. It was really, really good. It was something around the line of, you protect your yes, but you do not have to know your yes to protect your yes, ultimately. Okay. Thing three, ask your learning and development team and your employee engagement team what metrics they go by. This is really important because this can potentially have a huge shift for you all as you think of your ERG programs. You'll notice that for many of them, it's not with the intention of changing the business externally. A lot of it is really just about the employee's experience. In many cases, these are departments that live underneath the people team. Again, the people team is a complete cost center. It's all about investing in the employees with the concept of that's going to make them have more brand loyalty, that's going to make them want to stay here longer, all the things. And that's okay. And you'll see with those programs that it get invested in way more than your ERG program, let's be honest, that they're not trying to be so aggressive and trying to prove their worth because they already know what they are. Thing number 4, talk to your CFO, your chief financial officer. They kind of call the shots anyway. So ask them, what do you need to see for this to be a healthy cost center? And thing number 5, at least in the interim, while you're doing all these things, really try to understand what it means to have community first be the focus of your employee resource group and tie some metrics to that. Like, what does a strong community look like in metrics? Of course, those are things that I'm happy to talk about, but I promised I would leave time for Q&A and for all the things. So that'll just have to be another episode. Anyway, I'm done for today. I'm done with my rant. It felt good getting it off my chest. If you all have questions, you can start raising your hand now. In the meantime, I will share some updates, I guess, with the ERG movement. Not sure how familiar you all are with the ERG movement. I do see some new faces on here. If you have not tuned in, make sure that you go to my profile. You can click on the link in my bio, or you can just go to the ERGmovement.com. You'll see that there's a ton of free resources for employee resource group leaders and also program managers. And just in general, I just highly recommend checking that out. We also have a free community, the ERG Movement community. Highly recommend checking that out as well. Some really cool things going in there. And sometimes these conversations happen in that space that don't happen here on LinkedIn. So just saying, you want to be privy to those as well. Beyond that, I guess I don't really have any major updates. No questions at all. It doesn't necessarily have to be tied to this topic. I know it's been a while since we've done Q&A, but if anyone has any questions in general or comments, thoughts on this topic even, maybe not. This could just be like a moment of, I just have to really take in what she just said because most people don't say stuff like this, which is true. I know it's a lot, and it's really still something that I'm trying to figure out how to bake it out so that for executives, it makes a lot of sense. It's clear on like, okay, as we're turning and we're reshifting from being a ROI, heavy business ROI focused ERG into like an ERG that really has a strong community, what that looks like. So just know that there will be some things coming very soon that'll be a resource, hopefully, to you all as you have these conversations.